The darkest secrets of World War II. World War II is often remembered through its most visible moments: massive battles, famous leaders, and decisive victories. Yet beneath the surface of heroism and strategy lay a hidden world of secrets: covert experiments, suppressed atrocities, moral compromises, and crimes so disturbing that many were buried for decades. These darker truths reveal a war not only fought with weapons, but with fear, deception, and the deliberate sacrifice of humanity itself. 1. Human experimentation and medical atrocities. One of the most horrifying secrets of World War II was the scale of human experimentation conducted in the name of science and military advancement. Nazi medical experiments in Nazi concentration camps such as Auschwitz, Dachau, and Ravensbrück, prisoners were subjected to brutal experiments without consent. Doctors tested hypothermia by freezing victims to study survival in cold conditions, injected diseases like malaria and typhus, performed forced sterilizations, and conducted mutilating surgeries without anesthesia. These acts were not isolated crimes, but part of an organized system supported by the Nazi state. Unit 731, Japan's biological warfare program. Less known for many years was Japan's Unit 731, a secret biological and chemical warfare unit operating in occupied China. Prisoners, including civilians, women, and children, were deliberately infected with plague, cholera, and anthrax. Victims were dissected alive to observe disease progression. Entire villages were exposed to biological agents, causing epidemics that killed hundreds of thousands. After the war, many scientists involved avoided prosecution in exchange for handing their research to the United States, a moral compromise that remains deeply controversial. 2. The Holocaust beyond the camps. The Holocaust is often associated with gas chambers and camps, but some of its darkest chapters happened far from them. The Einsatzgruppen mobile killing squads known as Einsatzgruppen followed German armies into Eastern Europe. They executed Jews, Roma, political prisoners, and others by mass shooting, often forcing victims to dig their own graves. The massacre at Babi Yar, where over 33,000 Jews were murdered in 2 days, is one of the most infamous examples. Hidden collaboration. In several occupied countries, local collaborators assisted Nazi forces in identifying and deporting Jews. For decades, these uncomfortable truths were minimized or denied, only later emerging through survivor testimonies and declassified records. 3. Strategic bombing and civilian sacrifice. The deliberate targeting of civilian populations was a grim secret masked by military necessity. Firebombing of cities, Allied firebombing campaigns, devastated cities such as Dresden and Tokyo. In Tokyo alone, a single night of firebombing in March 1945 killed an estimated 100,000 civilians. These raids aimed to destroy morale, but resulted in immense human suffering, much of it long overshadowed by narratives of victory. Atomic bombings. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war, but unleashed unprecedented destruction. Beyond the immediate deaths, survivors suffered radiation sickness, genetic damage, and social stigma for decades. Internal documents later revealed that decision-makers were aware of many long-term consequences, but proceeded regardless. 4. Espionage, betrayal, and psychological warfare. World War II was also a war of secrets, spies, and manipulation. Double agents and deception operations like Operation Bodyguard, which misled Nazi Germany about the D-Day invasion, relied on elaborate lies involving fake armies and double agents. While successful, such deception sent soldiers to die in places deliberately chosen to distract the enemy. Psychological experiments. Both Axis and Allied powers explored mind control, interrogation techniques, and psychological warfare. Some of these experiments laid the groundwork for later Cold War programs involving unethical human testing. 5. War crimes by the victors. History is often written by the winners, and many Allied crimes remained hidden for years. Prisoner abuse. There were instances where German and Japanese prisoners were executed, starved, or abused in retaliation. Soviet forces in particular committed widespread atrocities against civilians in Eastern Europe during their advance toward Berlin, including mass rape and looting, topics long suppressed in official narratives. Forced repatriations. After the war, millions of people were forcibly returned to countries where they faced imprisonment or execution. The forced repatriation of Soviet POWs, many of whom were labeled traitors by Stalin, led to death camps and labor camps for survivors. 6. The silence after the war. Perhaps the darkest secret of all was how much was deliberately forgotten. Many perpetrators reintegrated into society, especially scientists and intelligence officers whose knowledge was deemed valuable. Governments sealed documents, survivors were silenced, and entire nations avoided confronting their roles. It took decades of investigation, survivor courage, and historical research for these truths to surface. Conclusion. World War II was not only a battle between nations, but a profound moral collapse that exposed the extremes of human cruelty and compromise. Understanding its darkest secrets does not diminish the sacrifices of those who fought against tyranny. It deepens our understanding of what happens when fear, ideology, and power override humanity. Remembering these truths is not about reopening old wounds, but about ensuring that such horrors are never hidden, repeated, or justified again. 7. Secret weapons and unethical scientific programs. World War II accelerated technological innovation at an unprecedented pace, but many breakthroughs came at a terrible ethical cost. Nazi wonder weapons Germany invested heavily in so-called Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons, including the V-1 and V-2 rockets, the world's first long-range guided missiles. These weapons were built using forced labor from concentration camps like Mittelbau-Dora, where tens of thousands of prisoners died from starvation, disease, and execution. More people died building the V-2 rockets than were killed by them in combat. The program's chief engineer, Wernher von Braun, later became a key figure in the U.S. space program, an uncomfortable reminder of how moral accountability was often sacrificed for technological advantage. Chemical and biological research. Despite international bans, multiple nations secretly stockpiled chemical weapons. Nerve agents such as taboon and sarin were developed by Nazi scientists, though never deployed on the battlefield. Allied forces also conducted chemical weapons testing, often exposing soldiers to toxic substances without informed consent. 8. Operation Paperclip and the Price of Victory. After the war, the world faced a new enemy, the Cold War. This led to one of the most controversial secret operations in modern history. Protecting war criminals under Operation Paperclip, the United States secretly recruited over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians, many with direct ties to Nazi war crimes. Their pasts were deliberately erased or minimized to prevent them from falling into Soviet hands. While this operation advanced American military and space technology, it allowed individuals complicit in atrocities to live freely, often comfortably, without facing justice. Moral consequences. This decision sent a clear message. Knowledge was more valuable than accountability. Survivors of Nazi crimes watched as perpetrators were rewarded, deepening the trauma and sense of betrayal that followed the war. 9. Mass rape and gendered violence. One of the most suppressed topics of World War II is the widespread use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. Europe and Asia. As Soviet troops advanced into Germany, millions of women, German, Polish, Hungarian, and others, were raped, often repeatedly. These crimes were rarely punished and were officially denied for decades. In Asia, the Japanese military forced women from Korea, China, the Philippines, and other occupied territories into sexual slavery as so-called comfort women. Many were teenagers. Survivors were silenced by shame, threats, and political pressure long after the war ended. Long-term trauma. These women suffered lifelong physical and psychological consequences. For decades, governments refused to acknowledge or compensate victims, making silence another form of violence. 10. Starvation as a weapon. Hunger was deliberately used as a tool of war. The Hunger Plan. Nazi Germany implemented the Hunger Plan, which aimed to starve tens of millions of people in Eastern Europe to feed German soldiers and civilians. Entire populations were marked for slow death through food deprivation. Prisoners of war Soviet POWs suffered some of the worst treatment in history. Over 3 million died from starvation, exposure, and disease in German camps. Their deaths were not accidental, they were planned. Meanwhile, Allied POWs held by Japan were subjected to brutal forced labor, malnutrition, and beatings. Survival often depended on sheer luck. 11 destroyed childhoods. Children were not spared from the war's cruelty, kidnapping and indoctrination. Nazi programs abducted children with Aryan features from occupied countries and forcibly Germanized them. Many never learned their true identities. Child soldiers and survivors. In devastated regions, children were forced to fight, steal, or scavenge to survive. Orphans wandered bombed cities, traumatized and alone. The psychological scars carried into adulthood shaped post-war generations. 12. The psychological cost of total war. The mental toll of World War II was enormous and largely ignored. Soldiers returned home with what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, but were often labeled weak or unstable. 13. War profiteers and corporate complicity. While millions suffered and died, some corporations and individuals quietly amassed enormous wealth. Industry built on forced labor. Major German companies, including arms manufacturers, chemical firms, and industrial giants, used forced labor from concentration camps. Prisoners worked under lethal conditions, producing weapons, vehicles, and chemicals essential to the Nazi war machine. Death rates were considered acceptable losses. This complicity extended beyond Germany. Banks, insurers, and neutral country corporations handled stolen assets, looted gold, and valuables taken from murdered victims. After the war, many companies denied involvement or paid minimal compensation decades later. Stolen wealth and vanished assets. Gold teeth, jewelry, artwork, and personal belongings from Holocaust victims were melted down or sold to fund military operations. Large portions of this wealth were never recovered, disappearing into international financial systems. 14. Secret diplomacy and backdoor negotiations. Despite the public image of total war, secret negotiations occurred behind closed doors, talks with the enemy. Late in the war, some Allied officials explored unofficial peace contacts with Nazi representatives, particularly to slow Soviet expansion in Europe. These talks, often conducted through neutral countries, prioritized political advantage over justice for victims. Operation Sunrise. One of the most controversial examples was Operation Sunrise, a secret negotiation between U.S. intelligence and German SS officers in Italy. While it helped end fighting in the region sooner, it allowed high-ranking Nazi officials to evade capture or receive lenient treatment. 15. Resistance movements and betrayal. Resistance groups are often remembered as heroic, but their reality was far more complex. Infiltration and sacrifice. Many resistance networks were infiltrated by enemy intelligence. Leaders knowingly sent members on missions with little chance of survival to protect larger operations. Entire cells were sacrificed to maintain secrecy. Moral ambiguity. Some resistance groups committed assassinations, sabotage, and reprisals that resulted in civilian deaths. These acts, while often necessary, blurred the line between heroism and tragedy. 16. The redrawing of the world, without consent. As the war neared its end, global leaders reshaped the future of nations without consulting their people. Yalta and Potsdam. At conferences such as Yalta and Potsdam, Allied leaders decided the fate of Eastern Europe. Millions found themselves trapped behind the Iron Curtain, their futures determined by strategic interests rather than freedom. Forced population transfers. Entire ethnic groups were expelled from their homes. Germans were driven out of Eastern Europe, while borders shifted violently across Poland, Ukraine, and the Balkans. These mass displacements caused suffering on a scale rarely acknowledged. 17. Justice delayed and denied. The promise of justice after the war was unevenly fulfilled. Selective prosecution. The Nuremberg trials prosecuted prominent Nazi leaders, but many perpetrators escaped accountability. Thousands of mid-level officials reintegrated into society, becoming teachers, judges, and civil servants. In Japan, Emperor Hirohito was never tried, despite his role as head of state. This decision was made to ensure political stability, again placing convenience above justice. Silence and fear. In many countries, discussing collaboration or war crimes was taboo. Survivors were pressured to stay silent for the sake of national unity. 18. How history was controlled. The final secret of World War II lies in how its story was told. Governments curated narratives emphasizing victory, heroism, and sacrifice. School books omitted uncomfortable facts. Memorials focused on soldiers rather than victims. Entire chapters of suffering, especially those involving women, minorities, and civilians, were minimized or erased. Only through declassified documents, survivor testimonies, and independent historians did these truths slowly emerge. Conclusion of Part 3. World War II did not end evil, it redistributed power. The darkest secrets of the war show that suffering did not stop when the guns fell silent. It was reshaped, rebranded, and often forgotten. Understanding these hidden truths does not weaken history, it strengthens it. Only by confronting what was buried can future generations recognize the warning signs of moral collapse before it happens again. 19. Generational trauma and the inherited wounds of war. The end of World War II did not bring emotional closure. Instead, trauma passed silently from one generation to the next. Children of survivors grew up in homes shaped by nightmares, silence, sudden rage, or emotional distance. Many Holocaust survivors never spoke of their experiences, believing silence was the only way to protect their families. In Germany, Japan, and other former Axis nations, children inherited shame without understanding its source. Psychologists later identified transgenerational trauma, showing how the psychological damage of war could affect people who never experienced it directly. The war lived on in memories, behaviors, and unresolved grief. 20. Nations built on unspoken lies. Post-war reconstruction depended not only on rebuilding cities, but on carefully constructed national myths, Germany and Japan. While both nations eventually confronted their wartime pasts, early post-war decades were marked by denial and minimization. Former Nazis held government positions in West Germany. In Japan, textbooks often downplayed atrocities in China and Korea, leading to ongoing regional tensions that persist today. The victors' blind spots allied nations, too, avoided accountability. Fire bombings, colonial violence, and racial segregation within allied forces were rarely acknowledged. Moral certainty replaced moral reflection. 21. The Cold War, a direct consequence. Many of World War II's darkest secrets fed directly into the Cold War. Former enemies became assets. Nazi scientists, Japanese biological warfare experts, and intelligence operatives were absorbed into new power structures. Surveillance, propaganda, and psychological manipulation, refined during World War II, became standard tools of global politics. The world never truly demilitarized, it merely changed uniforms. 22. Forgotten victims of the war. Some groups suffered immensely, yet remained largely invisible in historical memory. Roma and Sinti communities, nearly destroyed in the Holocaust, disabled individuals, targeted under eugenics programs, colonial soldiers, who fought and died for empires that denied them equality, civilians in occupied nations whose suffering never fit heroic narratives. Their stories survived mainly through oral history and grassroots remembrance, not official recognition. 23. Why these secrets still matter. The darkest truths of World War II are not relics of the past. They serve as warnings. Every time civilian deaths are justified as necessary, every time scientific progress excuses moral compromise, every time victims are told to remain silent for political stability, the shadows of World War II return. History shows that atrocities do not begin with mass murder. They begin with dehumanization, secrecy, and the belief that ends justify means. Final conclusion. Remembering without illusion. World War II is often called a good war, a fight against undeniable evil. But within that struggle were countless moments where humanity failed itself, sometimes in the name of survival, sometimes in the name of victory. To remember World War II honestly is not to deny courage or sacrifice. It is to acknowledge that even in just causes, terrible crimes can occur when power goes unchecked and truth is buried. The darkest secrets of World War II remind us that peace is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of accountability, memory, and moral courage. 24. Declassified truths and what we learned. Too late, decades after World War II ended, governments slowly opened their archives. What emerged shocked even seasoned historians. Files revealed the full extent of surveillance, secret executions, illegal experiments, and intelligence cover-ups. Some atrocities were known but deliberately hidden to preserve alliances. Others were buried to protect national pride. In many cases, justice had become impossible. Perpetrators were dead. Victims were gone. Truth arrived too late to heal, but not too late to matter. 25. How World War II shaped modern warfare. Many of today's military doctrines were born in secrecy during World War II, targeting civilian infrastructure, psychological warfare, and propaganda. Intelligence-led operations, scientific weapon development without ethical oversight, drones, cyber warfare, and mass surveillance all trace philosophical roots back to World War II. Decisions where secrecy and efficiency outweighed moral restraint. The war normalized the idea that total war requires total compromise, a belief that still haunts global conflicts. 26. Memory wars and the battle over history. Even today, World War II is not a settled story. Nations continue to fight over monuments and memorials, textbooks and school curricula, apologies and reparations. In some places, war criminals are rebranded as patriots. In others, victims are accused of exaggeration. History becomes a political weapon used to inspire nationalism rather than reflection. This manipulation of memory may be one of World War II's most dangerous legacies. 27. Survivors, testimony, and the last witnesses. As the last survivors pass away, the world faces a critical moment. Eyewitness testimony, raw, emotional, human, is disappearing. What remains are documents, recordings, and secondhand accounts. Without living witnesses, denial becomes easier and distortion more tempting. That is why survivor testimonies are among the most powerful weapons against historical erasure.